Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome to another SIGcast from Historical Period 3. Today we're going to review some of the things that we've already really talked about in terms of Napoleon III, Otto von Bismarck, and Count Cavour from Italy. And we're just going to talk about it more from the political spectrum side of things. So as you saw by the title slide, the feature here, the focus, is new conservatism, as well as a new thing that we call Realpolitik. So in the mid-19th century, new leaders were emerging that were seeking to unify and develop their states with a different approach. And what I really like to have you guys think about is what's new about this approach. Well, we've learned about leaders like in 1830, students of the Burschenschaften, or Giuseppe Mazzini with Young Italy, Risorgimento. They were romantics. They were caught up in idealism and, like the new movements of the time, nationalism, liberalism. They were romantic. This new style or new brand of politics or leadership style, these guys are realists. And that's why this is called Realpolitik. Okay? Politics of realism or politics of reality, being practical, not romantic. So these leaders, it's important to note, were considered conservative. Again, a new style of conservatism. They favored the church. They kept centralizing the power of their monarchy. Again, Bismarck with King Wilhelm or King William, and with Napoleon III, of course, it was himself as emperor, and then also with Cavour, it was Victor Emmanuel. Okay, so they're in favor of this conglomeration and expanding the power of the monarch in their particular realm. They were also wise to recognize the need to change, that things are changing. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't be like Metternich. You can't, resist change forever. So they figured, we'll advance it ourselves by manipulating the population, manipulating them and, making them grateful for our power and the positions that we take. And, again, who are they going to manipulate? What kind of movements are they going to use to manipulate people? Nationalism, liberalism, and then something else that's emerging by 1848, Marxism, socialism. So the examples, conservative views would be pro-church, supporting the monarchy, having central authority, going around parliaments. And their progressive or liberal views were nationalism, democracy, industrializing, protecting the new working class, kind of implementing some socialistic policies. I first introduced this term, Realpolitik, to you in the 1848 presentation, the presentation on revolutions of 1848, and I did so with telling you about Napoleon III. And if you remember, I kind of called him and referred to him as a chameleon. And when you think about Realpolitik, you kind of have to be a chameleon. Okay, so like Bismarck later, Napoleon III was a leader who used liberal and socialist agendas to form a state centered around his authority, or the monarch authority. He was a conservative. How was he conservative? He kept all the power in his hands as emperor. That's a conservative philosophy. And he also empowered the old authority. He gave preference to the church by involving them in public schooling. So they were happy. But he also recognized the need to change for times. And, non-conservative things that he did, to keep liberals happy, increase the powers of the National Assembly, Representative Assembly headed by regular people. If you remember, he did that, and then they gave him the ability to become emperor. To keep the socialists happy, he legalized strikes and unions and began public workshops. If you remember later in his career, as some of his foreign policy blunders occurred, and he's becoming unpopular, he did this to kind of maintain his influence over the people. To keep the nationalists happy, he expanded France by helping Cavour and gaining Italy territory in exchange for Savoy and Nice, And also, let's face it, it was a blunder on his part, but that was one of the reasons that he was in favor of intervention in the Crimean War. Next, we learned about another real politician as we learned about the unification of Italy. Cavour was an example of manipulative and a crafty statesman, much like Napoleon and Bismarck, and he used a very pragmatic, or what we call a practical, political approach. His intent was to keep a monarch as head of the new Italy, but he had to placate nationalists and liberals who were popular in Italy, like Mazzini, and probably the most greatest example of a nationalist was Giuseppe Garibaldi, his red shirts. So to make the government seem liberal, he eliminated noble and clerical privilege in Piedmont. He protected natural rights, which is liberalism, and he moved to unify Italy, which was a nationalist, romantic vision that a lot of people had had. So before the radical liberal Garibaldi could conquer most of Italy for unification, kick out the church and form a republic, Cavour knew that this would be disastrous and that France would certainly come in on the side of the Papal States. Cavour moved quickly to unite the North, not all of Italy. Again, he did it in steps that he knew, baby steps, if you will, that would work and not hinder the overall big picture. So using the help of France in the state of Piedmont, Cavour rushed to conquer and legitimize the control of northern Italy before Garibaldi. Once the North was already peacefully unified under a constitutional monarchy, Garibaldi, if you remember, as he was liberating the southern part of Italy with his red shirts through Sicily all the way up into the Papal States, he agreed to unify Italy completely, and no anti-Catholic republic was made. Otto von Bismarck, one of my favorites that we learn about. Again, a guy that was ahead of his time, a guy that just seemed to be the smartest guy in the room, and knew best, if you will. Bismarck was the best example of this new brand of conservatism, and he would use his new political ideology, Realpolitik, to do basically whatever it took to maintain power and to unify Germany through Prussia. A royal prime minister who served as king, Kaiser Wilhelm, Bismarck placated nationalists, liberals, and eventually socialists to keep himself and the king in power. Bismarck cleverly was able to placate nationalists and liberals in one move by suddenly supporting unification that Prussia opposed in involving regular people and people in the government. Not only did Prussia move forward to lead unification in 1870, but Bismarck created a small voting body, the Reichstag, in the government, with he and the king at the top. Both liberals and nationalists wanted to unify, and Bismarck just made sure that traditional authority kept its place while including regular people in the government in the Reichstag. Remember his blood and iron speech. And, when initially some of the liberals weren't supporting his nationalistic trends, he knew that the regular people, the majority of people, were in favor of unification. So he started collecting those illegal taxes to fund the military. After they defeated Austria and went after France, it was basically unanimous. People were loving the fact that Prussia was leading the way to unify German nationalities and that they were a really, really strong state. And so he knew that in the end, that would win out. And in the end, they voted after the fact to legalize all the taxes that he had been collecting along the way. Besides nationalists, he had to pass new laws and policies to placate or appease or satisfy a new group of people, socialists. With the Industrial Revolution in full swing in Prussia, the poor, the abused, the dissatisfied, and working class, they threatened to fight through the voting or violence for change. Governments at the time were still supporting laissez-faire capitalism, classical liberalism, if you will, and industry, opposing any type of reforms for tariffs and the protection of workers. So Bismarck shocked the world by using his authority and the king's authority to make Germany the first nation to pass socialist policies. This is important. in order to satisfy this disgruntled working class and avoid a revolt, he gave them medical and accident insurance in 1883, workers' compensation in 1884, pension and retirement plans in 1889, a form of Social Security, if you will, by 1889. The United States wouldn't even dabble with this until roughly around the 1930s under the New Deal under FDR. So again, this concludes this presentation about the new conservatism style of realpolitik that emerged in the late 19th century. Thanks for tuning in.